Okay, so I'll come back to this whole business there. We'll ignore that for a moment. But basically the idea here is I'm going to click a save button, right? So this is pretty familiar stuff. We're just going to grab the active employee, right? Okay, that's just obviously if we're doing an add, we have to call the add employee and just go back, right? Saving is pretty straightforward. Here's the one line that really does the work for us, because that's calling the save method of our view model, right? Our view model object, we added that as a method. We pass in a connected employee, right? Nothing to do with Sopranos here, but that employee was connected through the data context of the database, right? And we pass him into the save method, and then all the values in my view model object get copied over to the properties of the active employee, and it just looks after saving itself. I don't have to do anything special, right? This is only here because I have to call my add employee if it is an absolutely new employee. The delete, right? Good practice, just to show a message box, ask the question, are you sure you want to delete this person, right? Just good programming practice, no different from what we've done in many situations before. If they do, then we just call delete employee. So these two methods aren't there yet. I'm going to go add them next. Add employee and delete employee. Okay. Now they are going to go in my app object. Let me bring up my app XAML, the code behind. Now remember this guy. We came in here and we added these public variables, right, to keep track of the active department, active employee, and a link to our active database, our connection to the database, basically. So it makes sense that this is a logical place we could also put these methods. That's where these objects live. So inside of our app, which is accessible from everywhere, we'll have an add employee and delete employee method. And the code for them is pretty straightforward. Notice we don't need a update because that's already taken care of by the persistence awareness of our objects, right? But to add an employee, we have to call our employees collection or table, insert on submit, passing in the employee to add. And don't forget, the auto syncing will take care of the fact that it will replace that ID of 0, which we created when we faked out this object, and it will replace it with the real identity value created by the database. Okay. Delete employee, very similar. Just delete on submit, passing in the employee to be deleted as an object. And that takes care of that, submitting changes. So we just throw those into our app object right along with these public variables, and that gives us a nice central place to put all this database maintenance stuff. Now clearly, if you had a much larger application with numerous objects that you're going to be maintaining, tables, you're going to be maintaining the database, then this kind of approach, this Mickey Mouse approach here that we're doing as a basic simple one, is where, they would get pretty ugly looking if you started having add department, add employee, add room, add, and so on and so forth. So you'd definitely be switching then to that model view model design pattern to give a better separation of concerns and control of the actual project itself. But for one quick little table that we're editing here, right, because our department is really just a lookup that we can filter and look up values in, then this works just fine. Okay, so almost done. Let me think if I've missed anything. Okay, to be fair, I should explain, this is in the save button for my application bar here. This bit of code, I kind of ignored it at first. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was going on here, and read a whole bunch of blogs, and I finally found this workaround. Basically, if you have a regular button on your page, it's no problem. We're taking advantage of the fact that even our view model does notify property changed, right? So changing the value in a bound text box does update the property in the bound object. That's why we had to have that one interface implemented. The only trouble is you have to call that event to happen. That usually happens as you lose focus on the text box, as we saw, right? As soon as you click anywhere outside of the text box, which includes clicking a button on the page, that causes it to lose focus, and the property binding takes care of notifying and updating the actual property in my view model object. Problem is, these darn little app bar buttons at the very bottom, they're just too darn fast. If you modify the content of a text box and then click the save button, it seems to just fly right over. It skips over the whole lost focus event and never has a chance to update the property. So it took me a long time to figure out what was going on. It wasn't any of the online tutorials that I had 3 different tutorials up in front of me that I was using to help put this sample together. I couldn't find the answer in any one of them, but I did some blogging and searching and so on, and I found this little workaround. Trick to force a text box to update its binding, right? Just needed with app bar buttons. So basically, we're just calling it to bind as if it has seen its lost focus event, right? So just boilerplate code now that I put in whenever I'm using these app bar buttons to make sure all the text boxes update themselves if I want to go on and do something else where the data needs to be updated. Just to explain where that came from. I didn't write it, but I did steal it. I mean, I did glean it from other people's sharing their workarounds for the same issue, and away you go. So I'm sharing it with you. I'm not greedy. I'm going to be willing to share, and hopefully you will do the same for others. But I just had to explain what that code is. All right, so I think we're ready. We'll actually try this out now. Now let me go in here to Betty, right? So we see it did load the information. So we can see the functionality here. I do have my drop-down list, right, basically. So I can change Betty from information systems to human resources. Save the changes and go back. And Betty TTT is now in human resources. We see it right there, right? I can go back into Betty again, maybe clean up this name. Just for clarity, I'm going to hit the page down button on my keyboard. Just lets me use the keyboard on the computer, right? Then I can see the whole screen a little bit more effectively. Here's this date, okay? Choose date, right? So instead of 2008, oh, she didn't start work on a Sunday. I must have had that wrong. It must have been the Monday, right? So you see how this works? You just have your little scrolls for each, and now it's updated with the 18th instead of the 17th. Okay. So that. Oh. Well, we can look at issues like that later, but for now, I'm almost out of time on this recording. That's pretty good. So how about add? Let's try the add, right? So AAA, ZZZ, job title, in the accounting department is fine. We'll just take today's date. That works fine. And okay. Works for free.
Slave labor?
Ah.
Oh.
Okay. All right. Then introduce our last topic, which we'll get to the next slide, is validation, right? How do we handle validation errors? And that's something we'll deal with. I'll stop this recording.